All right, we are recording and we are ready to go. So, welcome everybody. We are missing Mike Mandel himself today simply because he has a very close and dear old friend who is going through quite a health scare, and this was the only time he could go away and visit with his friends. So, Timothy and I are going to take care of you today, and we've got Kryssa Marie Bowman as our guest today. Before I do the quick introduction and hand it over to Kryssa, I just wanted to say that welcome, everybody. This is our regular third Tuesday of the month where we do our topical call. And quite often, those topical calls involve bringing in guest trainers, high quality hypnosis trainers that we've known for quite some time from all around the world, and nothing unlike what I just described today. Kryssa is obviously somebody who's been in our community for a very long time, and she is an amazing hypnosis trainer, hypnotist in her own right. So we're going to bring her on and explain. I'll let her handle all the usual stuff, but this is going to be recorded as it is being recorded. The replay will go inside of the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy in the bonus guest speakers section, which is underneath all of the lessons. So here we go. Kryssa is a professional hypnotist who specializes in bridging hypnosis with the science of consciousness. And she also hosts weekly group healing sessions every Monday, which are the highlight of her week. Kryssa became a hypnotist after finding freedom from agoraphobia and a lifelong battle with anxiety using the power of hypnosis. And her academic background was in applied psychology. And I hear she used to be a professional chef for several years. She's passionate about empowering others to step out of their own limiting beliefs and embrace their own unique talents with her flagship program called Quantum Journeys Hypnosis Academy. So, with that, welcome Kryssa Marie Bowman. Yay!
Thank you so much, Chris. I was totally just taken back to that show, The Dating Game, back
Oh,
in
yeah.
the 80s, where they like introduce you and they say all the, the things. Anyways, that was fun. Hi, everyone. I am so incredibly excited and honored to be here. I mean it, like, really, this is most exciting and slightly anxiety producing dream come true. And I'm really sad Mike can't be here today, but he did reach out to me yesterday directly and assured me that he's looking very forward to watching it later. So I want to say I credit MMHA for filling in many of the holes left from my original hypnosis training. And also for clearing up that there is no one size fits all approach from any one trainer or any one method. We have the ability to have a vast toolbox and to get very skilled at using all of these different tools. And so I really encourage anybody to get out there and join, any academy or program or course that just resonates with you. You can't go wrong. You may not even end up using it very much, but at least you have another tool. So for me, after RTT and then MMHA, I have since gone on to become certified in IACT, ICBCH, Old Pain to Go, and IHA, all leading up to me creating my own board accredited internationally certifying course, QJHA, or Quantum Journeys Hypnosis Academy. And so thank you to Chris and also Mike, who isn't here right now, for providing what I truly consider to be the foundation of my hypnosis training. I come back to the MMHA modules over and over again, and now there's all new ones. And I'm excited to be digging into those, and what a monumental task that was. I'm still just astounded. I think I've dug into maybe like 1%, and that's it so far. So I'm really looking forward to the rest. But I hope everyone here in this room is or soon will be using this incredible training, these incredible trainers for your own foundation, or even your launch pad, because really that's what it's been for me. And speaking of which, I have a little offer for you guys at the end of today's training that can absolutely help you to launch yourselves into the stratosphere of hypno success. Perhaps you've heard of the money table, which would not have come about had I not studied Mike Mandel's ego states transformation. It is a direct offshoot of working with ego states and introjects. And so if you have it already, great. If you don't, you're in for a real treat. I will post the link in the chat. Actually, I think Chris is going to post the link in the chat box for me. And if you're watching this later in the replay, just reach out to me directly and I will hook you up. This is just for MMHA students or members and students and graduates. People in the MMHA verse, let's just say that. So, as Chris mentioned, my academic background is in applied psychology, which sounds nice and sweet and therapeutic, but honestly, that wasn't my interest. It was the research lab heavy side of things. That was the psych department. That was my world, where we study how the brain works, how learning works, how memory works, how conditioning works, all the sort of like fun meta type stuff. And I was drawn to this because I was actually raised with a lot of new age woo woo concepts. And as a teenager and young adult, it's our job to rebel, right? So my rebellion took the form and shape of going into hardcore science, things that could be replicated, things that could have a proven null hypothesis. And yes, okay, so I do admit that my fascination on this subject stemmed from the desire to understand the inner workings of my own little twisted brain, which I think is pretty much how anyone ends up in psychology in college. Yeah. And maybe even in hypnosis. I mean, come on, I would love to see a quick show of hands of who resonates with that concept. Yes. Okay. I thought so. I'm not the only one. But the thing is, and this is important to my origin story of becoming a hypnotist, which I am offering for a very specific reason that I'll share with you in a moment. I had absolutely no desire to be a therapist, like a counselor, none, zilch. I often run into people who tell me that they knew from an early age that they wanted a career helping people. Not me. Nope. Like I had enough troubles of my own, plus a noggin full of neurodivergent spiciness and quirkiness. And I had no desire to add anyone else's problems to that. I was pretty happy just tinkering away in my own little university research lab, studying laboratory animals, doing self-reported testing on human subjects. That was really fun. But life has a way of sort of doing unexpected things. And I found myself unexpectedly a single mom of 4 kiddos, which meant that I no longer had the luxury to just hang out in my little lab and really basically make no money and instead pay to be there. I couldn't just hide away forever in my little paradise of research. And so I had to pay the bills. And I took my love of experimenting and learning into the kitchen and became a chef. And I'd already had a brief stint with some culinary training years before. So this was sort of a natural trajectory for me. And kitchens are really just another kind of lab, right? I mean, they are. Sadly, I had a stalking situation in 2003. And yes, there's a reason I'm telling you all this. I promise I'll tie it up. The stalking situation resulted in me developing some agoraphobic tendencies, which Chris sort of touched upon. And this caused me to have to change how I did my chefing, my culinary career. I became a private chef instead. And so my version of agoraphobia wasn't that I couldn't ever leave at all. The longest I ever went was like 3 months of not being able to leave, but I had all these like conditions in place. So I could go shopping for my clients' food. I could bring it home. I could prepare it there, but I couldn't bring it to them. I used to actually cook it in their kitchens. I couldn't do that anymore. They had to come pick it up from me. And so, it was just a huge inconvenience, especially raising 4 kids. 2 of them were just infant twins, and I could usually get done what I needed to get done as long as I stuck to these little agreements that I made with myself. And if it sounds a little bit like OCD, you're not wrong. But just so you know, um, I don't tend to tell this whole origin story, but I actually had 4 people yesterday ask me. And so that's why I'm sharing this with you. They're like, are you going to tell us how you got started in hypnosis? Like, what's your deal, Kryssa? How did you just sort of spring onto the scene one day a few years ago? And so this is that quick story, but it does tie into the beyond ego states that we're going to be talking about here. And so this is sort of the Reader's Digest version, which I realized just totally aged me, didn't it? That in the dating game. But I did seek out therapy for these agoraphobic tendencies. And I was fortunate enough to find somebody who was willing to come to my house for the first few sessions. And we did EMDR and we did some other like de-traumatizing type stuff. She was not a hypnotist. And this was before the days of online therapy. So I was incredibly fortunate that she was willing to come to my house. And I saw her for the next 13 years, and we did make some headway. there was progress. I even managed to go on a family vacation to San Diego for a week, which was actually a harrowing experience, but I think I did a fairly good job of hiding that from my kids. I was pretty much shaking in my boots the entire time that we were there. And when I came back, I realized this is just no way to live. I didn't want to live that way anymore. I wanted to be able to pick up and go wherever I want to go and do whatever I want to do and not have to have all these little agreements like I can go if I'm with somebody, or I can go if it's less than 2 miles from my home, or I can go if it's only 20 minutes, or, all these things that I had going on. So I looked into hypnosis for myself. And I realized that the main reason I didn't want to become a therapist all those years ago was because talk therapy was excruciating and it took forever. It was a painful process. And I usually left crying or at least feeling worse than when I walked in. But when I had hypnosis, I left feeling better. I had 3 sessions, and each session I felt better and freer and more liberated. And in those 3 sessions, I made more progress with the agoraphobic issues than I had in 13 years of talk therapy, which included a few years of EMDR, by the way. And I'm not saying EMDR isn't great, and I'm not saying that talk therapy doesn't have its place, but I am saying that there are some things that can be much more effectively resolved using hypnosis. And so that's when I was like, maybe I do want to work with people. Maybe I do want to be a hypnotist. When I saw that it could be like that instead of like leaving in tears constantly and having to go through all of the pain of your childhood trauma week after week, like that. So I joined a hypnosis program. I obtained my first certification in a school that was focused primarily on regression to cause, which is fine, but I found it to be not enough all on its own. So I sought out the most extensive training that I could find, asking around, and that is how I landed here in the MMHA universe. I share all this with you for a few reasons, but one of them is that it's been brought to my attention that there are some colleagues out there that think some of my stuff is kind of out there. So I wanted to let you know I do in fact have a hardcore science background. And that at least as far as, academia and professional training are concerned, like I still approach hypnosis as a researcher first. I never assume that I know everything or that there's only one way to do things or, any of that stuff. I still approach everything with like I wonder what's going to happen next. And so anyway, don't worry, today's training, Chris, is not going to be very woo-woo. In fact, we're barely just going to dip our tiny little toesies into the shallow end of the kiddie pool, I promise. But I would like to point one thing out, and that this might surprise some of you actually, but if you look back through all of my trainings online that are like sort of available publicly on YouTube or whatever, you'll see that this is true. I do not classify myself as a spiritual hypnotist. I don't even use the term spiritual hypnosis. In fact, the only time I ever use the word spirit or spiritual is if my client is using it. And that's it. And this is on purpose. I'm interested in the science of consciousness. I'm interested in how that interacts with frequencies of emotion, frequencies of energy, frequencies of light, of sound, of altered states of cognitive awareness, which is what essentially trance is, right? Trance is an altered state of cognitive awareness. So all of this brings us to today's topic, finally, beyond ego states, communicating with multidimensional consciousness. Before we dive in, I would love to ask everyone who has questions about this stuff to either put them in the chat or write them down, and then you can just raise your hand later or whatever, and Chris can read them out to me at the end. I am just nervous enough that if we stop me halfway through, I might not be able to pick the thread back up. And so please, if you could just put them in there, and then I will get to all of those when I wrap things up. And so I would like to know, though, a quick show of hands, who here has studied Mike's ego states transformation? I can see some of you, not all of you, but I'm going to click through and just be like, okay. Oh, perfect. Oh, good. Okay. And who uses it professionally in your practice? One, two, okay. All right. Yeah, this is great. So you already know how powerful this technique is. And Mike himself has been known to say on more than one occasion, everything is at the level of ego states. And certainly when it comes to conscious and unconscious motivations and drives, I do not disagree with this statement at all. And so you might be saying, but Kryssa, what else is there besides the human conscious and unconscious mind? To which I say, exactly, what else indeed? This brings us to the concept that everything we are dealing with here is a model. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. This is a model, okay? I've studied brain anatomy. There is no one region we can point to and say, here lies consciousness. And of course, the fun part is that the model of the human mind was conceived by what? The human mind. Yes. So not to get too meta on you, but I bring this up for a reason. When we assume that we are dealing with one thing, we tend to perceive it through the lens of just that one thing. So if we assume that all we're dealing with is neurons firing, dendrites growing, synapses forging new connections, then that's the filter that we will view these experiences through. And we will potentially miss out on other phenomenon if that's the only lens that we have. And so anything that doesn't fit neatly into these little like 3D understandings of the world that we've created, these models, these maps, you know, because that's what it is, the understanding of the map. And the map is not the territory, it's not the brain, it's like what we think is going on and what works for us as far as being able to perceive, you know, conceive of it. And so if it doesn't fit neatly in there, we might just miss it altogether or dismiss it altogether. And so that's where me and my fun little ADHD neurodivergent quirkiness comes in and goes, oh, something new and different and exciting that nobody else has explained before. I'm diving in deep. And so here we go. We're going to dive in deep beyond ego states, communicating with multidimensional consciousness. And of course, no conversation about ego states can be complete without a discussion of those pesky little introjects. So for the purposes of today's training, because I have seen several people in the Facebook group asking, what is an introject? How do you deal with it? How do you know what's going on with that? I'm going to tell you. There's actually a pretty simple way. I'm hoping by the end of this, you'll be like, oh, I get it. I totally get it now. I'm going to start off by saying that ego states are endogenous, which means they come from within. They are derived internally. This word is often used in the field of biology when referring to something that originates from within the organism, while introjects, on the other hand, are exogenous, meaning originating from outside of the organism, outside of the system. So these would be attitudes, ideas, beliefs that somebody unconsciously incorporates into their personality from outside of themselves. A helpful metaphor might be to look at introjects as hitchhikers that you would pick up while driving along the path of life. Some hitchhikers are amusing, some are emotionally draining, some are a little downright scary, some can be kind of smelly, some might even be kind of helpful. They can come from other people's beliefs and opinions that you took on as your own, like parents, caretakers, teachers, that sort of thing. But they can also come from societal, cultural judgments and expectations. The important thing to keep in mind here, though, and this is really, I'm going to say this really slow, maybe twice even, is that you pulled over to pick them up. They didn't metaphorically carjack you. It is up to you to decide to let them in, which means that it is up to you to decide when to let them go. Now, in some cases, it could be very beneficial to understand why you picked them up in the first place, and how their presence in your vehicle has impacted you. It might help you to prevent from picking up another one that's similar, that causes similar issues for you. But the why is actually not nearly as important as the how to get rid of them. And I think especially in our industry, people can get accidentally very stuck in the why, thinking that if they understand why a thing is happening, that somehow will magically make it go away. And I'm sorry to say, it actually can make it magically stickier. Because once you understand why, if you don't actually understand how to make it go away, now you're stuck with knowing why you're doing it, but you're still doing it. And that can make you feel even more broken. Because then you're just like, but I know why. So why isn't it gone? Anyway, in other cases, it could just be a matter of realizing that these hitchhikers are stinking up your vehicle by causing the internal environment to be inhospitable to you. Maybe you have an introject that wants to eat terrible food, that would sort of stink up that internal environment, right? And so you just want to get it out of there. You don't need to necessarily know why or who you got it from or how long it's been there. I mean, it might be helpful, it might not, but really what you need is for it to go. And in some cases, you might even kind of like their company. So you're not really looking to get rid of them, even though they're not exactly paying their way and they are in fact using up your resources, but maybe you decide to let them stay. And one like explanation for that could be if you have these negative or sabotaging or destructive behaviors that are at the level of an introject, but it pushes people away, that keeps you safe. You don't have any more room in your vehicle to pick up anybody else because you've got this one that's pushing everybody away. And so that could be a secondary gain, right? And doing this work on your own, you can do it. It can be a little bit challenging though, especially if you're dealing with introjects that have been with you for a long time, or if you've been feeding them regularly. You have the fast food every day, it kind of makes that introject bigger, as fast food would tend to do. And then it's taking up more space in you and can be more difficult to get it to leave. So I want to tell you that I think the coolest thing about introjects is that they're actually fairly easy to get rid of once you identify them as an introject, which we do. And here's the part where I think people might get a little like, how can you tell when it's an introject versus an ego state? So here's how you tell. We do by asking it all the same questions that we would ask an ego state. But while we will find that ego states are willing to change and evolve to help the client in these new or improved ways, introjects are not. And it's not even that they refuse, it's that they can't. They can't because they're not truly a part of the client. They arrived fully formed from elsewhere. Dad's belief, mom's belief, the teacher's perception, society's understanding, whatever. They arrive fully formed from elsewhere. And so you don't really have the power, the ability, or the right to change it because it is its own belief, right? That came from somewhere else. And so the only options are to keep it or get rid of it. It's not going to evolve. It's not going to change. It's not going to get better. You either keep it or get rid of it. Those are your options. So if you find a part that refuses to change, that refuses to evolve, that just can't really take on the changes, or maybe it tries it and then it goes back, it just can't stick with the changes, or refuses to give it a new name, or any of the things, if it just gets kind of stubborn and sticky and won't move like an ego state will, then just ask them, straight up ask, say, hey, are you in fact a part of this person? Or have you just sort of been hitching a ride? And weirdly, and when Mike said this in his first ego states class in February of 2021, I was like, what? I didn't believe him, but it's so true. Weirdly, if you ask them straight up, they will tell you, they'll be honest. They'll be like, they might not even say it, but they might just start to disappear or go away or shrink or become more diffuse, or they can't keep up the mask anymore once you've identified them. It's really interesting. And what's really cool is sometimes they'll even morph into the person that the client initially picked them up from before they go. Like suddenly you'll see dad or mom or your first employer or that third grade teacher or whatever it is. And there's different ways that they go. And they may need some assistance in completely going, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But they will either disappear, dissipate into the ether, walk away until they're gone, shrink into nothingness, or something will happen that lets you know that, okay, this is not a part. So that's introjects. And please notice that I said introjects, not interjects. To interject is to interrupt, right? To put something in abruptly into a sentence or something that's going on. Introject is a noun. So I'm going to give you a quick example of an introject that I ran into recently. It was a woman who came to me struggling with some disordered eating patterns. And this is something I work with frequently, as I myself struggled with disordered eating patterns in my teens and early 20s. So it's something that I feel close to. Anyway, we did some ego states transformation on the primary part involved. And as we were getting to know this part by asking its name, or what I thought was the primary part, that's what I was asking to talk to, its name, its job, how old the client was when it became a part of them or came to help them, and how she imagined it might appear physically, and often I'll just say, what do you imagine this part would look like? Instead of what does this part look like? Because I think a lot of people get stuck on the verbiage. If you say, what does this part look like? Well, I don't know. But if you say, what do you imagine it looks like? That kind of gives them permission to go ahead and allow it to take form. And it appeared as this little starving little waif of a girl with tattered clothes and dirty fingernails and dark circles under her eyes. And, I thought this seems like an ego state. But the first clue that it was an introject was that her name was the middle name of her mother, which the client was surprised about. The second clue was that the age at which she came into the client's life was 14, which is not completely unheard of, but it's unusual. Most of these states come like in the first 7 years, is my understanding. Not always, but most of the time they develop, earlier in childhood. The third clue was that she couldn't quite figure out what her job was. Just that she was supposed to make the client feel bad about herself. But upon deeper questioning, it wasn't as a protective measure. Usually, if it's about making the client feel bad about themselves, you find out just through further questioning that it's because, well, like if we can get the client to feel bad, then it doesn't hurt when somebody else rejects them, or it doesn't hurt when somebody else abandons them or criticizes them. But in this case, it was like, no, I don't care. I don't care what happens to the client. Like, I don't care. Right? I'm not trying to protect her. She's not even like, I don't even like her. I don't even know why I'm here, kind of. So the fourth clue was that even though she wanted to be clean and healthy and grow up, this little part, which was an introject, we found out all of the changes that we made wouldn't stick. Like we would clean her up and suddenly she'd be dirty again. We put her in a new dress and suddenly she'd have the old tattered one on again. We'd clean her fingernails and suddenly they would come back to being dirty again. And that was really interesting. I hadn't had that happen, but I was like, yeah, there's something else going on here. But the biggest one was that she asked for a mirror because she wanted to see how beautiful she was when we made these little changes, and then she kept changing back, and in the mirror suddenly it was the client's mother looking back at her, and the client laughed and said, oh my God, I get it now. That's not even me. It's not from me. It's not me. It's not a part of me. And the introject just disappeared into nothingness. All right, so I hope that clarifies introjects a bit. I'm going to touch upon them a little bit more in just a moment, but like we're going to dig into ego states now. So we're done with introjects, and they're not the star of the show, but I wanted to clear that up because I see a lot of people asking questions about that. And I was just hoping maybe I could offer some further clarification. But they're not the star of this show, and they are never the star of the show. They are never the star of your sessions. The real star of the show here is what happens when you go beyond ego states, at least for the purposes of this training. When you communicate with your client's consciousness at multiple different levels. What does this mean? So I have a metaphor all prepared for you because I love metaphors. And so they're very useful and just sort of naturally hypnotic. Yes. All right. So let's say that human consciousness is like a cell phone. And the icons that we interact with on the screen are representative of the apps. They are not the apps themselves. They are representative of the apps. Yes? Okay. So when we are interacting with an ego state, we are interacting with the icon or the avatar, the user interface of the ego state. The ego state is at a level of deeper programming. You could even say at the level of neural pathways, whatever you wish to think of it as, but it's at the level of the user interface that we're dealing with the actual ego state. What does it appear to look like? How old does it seem to be? What is its job? All those things are at that level of the user interface. So the deeper programming is all the little ones and the zeros, which we can think of metaphorically as being the deeply held beliefs and perceptions that are associated with this particular state, this ego state, this neural pathway. And am I making sense so far? I just want to make sure. Okay. And I really can't stand it when people.
You're making a lot of sense and is all flowing very nicely.
Okay, perfect. Good. Thank you. Yeah, and I don't like saying does that make sense? Because I feel like that puts too much of the responsibility on your shoulders. So am I making sense? That puts it squarely on my shoulders where it belongs, because I'm the one doing this, right? So, okay. So the unconscious then would be at the level of the hardware, and also the operating system. So both, right? So you've got the hardware with all the, little bits of machinery, and then you've got the operating system that is embedded into the processor of that. So that can be likened to the brain, the body, the central nervous system, that's connecting them to each other. And it's the motherboard that allows everything to run, as well as the processor that sort of gives it life, right? And continues everything running. And that could be maybe like the heart, and the brain, but it's also responsible for making sure of things that your conscious mind doesn't ever have to worry about. So like, make sure the notifications work, that the backlight of the screen is on, that the volume is set, whether it's on or off or airplane mode or sleep mode or whatever, like all those things, those would be like our autonomic nervous system. That would be like our heart beating. That would be like breathing, blinking our eyes, our liver processing stuff without us having to say, hey, liver, it's the holidays, you're going to be on call, right? Okay. So all those things are happening at that deeper level of just sort of autonomic stuff. And this can be thought of as central nervous system, heart, brain, nerves, muscles, bones, every cell. I mean, right down to the DNA level. It's everything that allows the phone to function, even without the apps, which are the ego states. So like, you have a brand new phone, that's like a baby. It just got born. It doesn't have the programming yet, right? Okay. And so the conscious mind would be all the apps that are running in the foreground at any given moment. And we can't run that many all at once. I think Mike says 7 to 9 bits of information, though I'm guessing in 2023, it might even be less than that, because I feel like collectively we have just less patience for screens and paying attention to things. I could be wrong. But those are the things that are just right there in the foreground at any given moment. We're using this app, and now we're using this app. And now we're using, and we're not typically we might have multiple apps open, but we're not using all of them at the same time. There's always one in the executive, right? So that would be the ego state that's in the executive. And the system just isn't designed to run all of them all at once. We can try, and we can even try to convince ourselves that we can multitask. But honestly, I feel like something ends up being compromised when we do that, right? The same happens for the apps on your phone. And if you have a bunch of old ones running in the background that you're not using anymore, what are they doing? They're slowing things down. So if you have a bunch of old unnecessary beliefs running in the background of your own programming that just don't fit with who you are anymore, get them out of there, man. Get some hypnosis and get them out of there so that the whole system can run better. All the apps that are downloaded and available that we're not actively interacting with could be considered the deeper subconscious programming. Now, I know Mike doesn't use the term subconscious, but I find that it works well in this particular model because it fits in nicely with my background in applied psychology, but also because the subconscious mind I see as part of the unconscious. The unconscious is vast. The subconscious is part of that. It's not all of it. There's also, like we said, the autonomic nervous system. There's other things happening. There's the picking up of other energies, just emotional energy. When you're in a room with a grumpy person, you feel it. You just do. And that's not too woo, I hope. And I feel like everybody here has had some experience with that. So the conscious mind is whatever programs are running in the foreground at any given moment. The unconscious is all the other stuff that's not currently being active or activated, and also the stuff that just runs deeper than the level of programming, the operating system and the hardware. So what about the Wi-Fi signal, guys? Okay. So this is what allows you to connect to additional information that's not housed within the programmed apps of the phone. That would be like the information that we pick up on energetically as we move through the world. Some people have better signals than others. Perhaps we can consider this as like operating at 5G would be super highly refined intuition. Just more tapped in to collective consciousness, perhaps. And maybe others are operating at, maybe they don't have a smartphone. Maybe they have like the, original sort of flip, like Nokia flip phones or whatever, and they're operating within a 2G framework, and they're only sort of accessible to like a little bit outside, not everything outside. No judgment one way or the other. They both work, they get the job done, they communicate, and all the apps work and whatever. So, but what is the highest wisdom state in this metaphor? I would say it's the user. I would say the highest wisdom state is the one who's choosing which icons to click on in order to launch whatever programs are needed in any given moment. And it tends to stay out of the way. It's not loud like the subconscious mind can be loud, like anxiety is loud, right? But intuition is quiet. So I feel like it's at the level of the user that's just like, I need this, now I need that. Let's go see what this is. And that's not to say that it can't insert itself. It can't make it, it definitely can. It can decide what programs or apps it wants to delete, the ones that are slowing things down, or upgrade to new and improved programming, or download entirely new programs and information, some of which might even change how the phone works itself. It might change the speed, or who knows, but it could actually change how the phone works itself. It might not change the motherboard, but it could absolutely change the operating system and how the apps interact with each other. And so it's typically not going to get too involved, I think, with the deeper levels of things, because those ones and zeros don't necessarily make sense to it. But if something is amiss, which could come in the form of some sort of glitch, right? Or if you take that metaphor to the human body, it could be like physical or emotional pain, or some sort of sabotaging or destructive behaviors, intrusive thought patterns, and the like. So stepping out of that metaphor for a moment and back into the human experience, one effective way to do that, of course, is through hypnosis. Hypnosis is, as far as I know, the only kind of change work that can communicate with pretty much every level of the human consciousness, from operating system to programming, to the strength of the Wi-Fi signal, to how the apps interact with each other. And I wanted to say, can you guess what the Introjects would be using this model? They would be like the broken codes, the bugs in the system, the little bits of wonky programming that cause things to get glitchy, that just need to be overwritten, gotten out of there so things work well again. At least that's how I see it. Yeah, the viruses, exactly. Who said that? Terrence. Okay, so let's get into an actual client session where I found myself communicating with what at first I thought was an ego state, then maybe thought it was an introject. But as we continued to communicate, I realized it didn't fit into either framework. It was most closely related to an ego state, but it turns out I was directly speaking with the intelligence of my client's heart. Her heart, yes. That powerful little bit of machinery that is absolutely necessary for the operation of the entire system. So this client was a little bit younger than me and in much better physical condition because she loves tennis and she was very outdoorsy. But she had suffered a series of mini strokes and nobody knew why. She seemed so healthy. Nobody could figure out she wasn't overweight. There was like no plaque in her, arteries. And she began struggling with AFib, and it was a daily occurrence now. And it was not just an inconvenience. I mean, it was potentially fatal. And this was no way to live. And she wanted to be able to get back out there and not just, stay alive, but have a quality of life again. So she could take all of the medications and everything and be alive, but she wanted to actually live. And so she found me. And she was actually a psychoanalyst herself. So I was more than a little bit nervous when I took her on, but I was like, okay, we're just going to go in there and do the best we can, see what happens. Nope, I didn't want to give any false hopes or promises, but I was like, I'm there with my full self. I'm going to give you everything, like all of me. And let's just be curious together. Anyway, so talking to her heart, how is this possible? You might ask, well, how is talking to an ego state possible? Or an introject? Remember, we're working with a model here. A model is like the map, but the map is not the territory. So in this particular model, we have access to multiple levels of consciousness, from the level of user interface with the icons on the screen, to the level of the programming where all those ones and zeros are, to the level of going deeper to the operating system, and then perhaps in this case anyway, going to the level of the actual motherboard. And we ended up accessing the Wi-Fi a bit too for this. So what we ended up doing was dialoguing with her heart. We had been proceeding as if this were an ego state. We'd rolled out it being an introject at this point because it absolutely did want to help, and it was not the least bit interested in going anywhere, and it loved her and it wanted to help her. And it wasn't behaving like an ego state in some pretty key ways. And so I was like, I think we're onto something different here, but let's just roll with it. And so this might be where Gordon Emerson calling them resource states fits in well, because it was beyond an ego state, but still accessible in a similar fashion. And so I'm going to go ahead and share this little piece with you, and I put it into a slide so that you could read along with it, because the audio is terrible, and I'm really sorry about that. So we have just a clip of a transcript with a little bit of audio, and I do apologize for the audio not being very good. Just infuse it right into the molecular structure. Oops. There we go. Start at the beginning.
Not, but like native. I don't know, cells, it's not intestine. I think it actually is my heart. It's just very, the tissue is very like hard or something. Not the right color.
Let's give it some light, some of that soft pink light. Just infuse it right into the molecular structure and see if it accepts it. It might be like a plant that just hasn't been watered properly in a long time, and it just soaks it right up. What does it do with that?
That actually feels good. It softens it.
Perfect. Let's keep going with that then. And I had to cut it off here because I ended up using her name in the third person right after that, where I was talking to the heart and asking the heart, what can we do to help her? And she did give me permission to use that clip, but she said, I don't want my name in there. So because of, you know, what she does for a living too. And I was like, I get it, totally. And here's something interesting that some of you probably know, maybe not everyone, but our hearts actually do have cells that are very similar to neurons. They're called glial cells. They behave very similarly to neurons. And so I would go so far as to say that the heart does have its own version of intelligence, and it's been measured at this point. You can look it up. It's GLIAL, glial cells. Andrew Huberman talks about them all the time. This is not a woo-woo thing, okay? Maybe what they say is a little woo-woo, but the fact that they exist is not. Anyway, so at any rate, she gave me permission to use this clip, and not to share her name, but what we did from here was a whole lot of me just asking her heart questions, asking what it needs, rather than me, Kryssa the hypnotist, being so audacious or arrogant as to think that I would know what it needs. I was like, I've never talked to a person's heart before. It seems like it probably would know what it needs. So I'm just going to ask the questions. And it did. And so that whole thing about the soft pink light, that came up for her earlier in the session. And so I was like, let's just bring that in and see what happens, you know? And always when I suggest things like that, if the person says, no, that doesn't feel right, I'm like, okay, let's try something else, you know? What would you like to do? So beyond suggesting the soft pink light, which she had added as a color for like a bubble of protection energy that had happened earlier in the session, I just asked, what does it need in order to come into a state of health and balance? In other words, I treated it very much like an ego state. Just like when you're asking the ego state, what do you need to be happy? Do you want to change how you appear? Do you need to have different tools? Do you need anything at all from the client to help you to be able to do your job better, or to do this new job better, or to do a better version of the job that you had, or whatever it is, right? So I just asked all the same questions that we would ask of an ego state, I asked of the heart. Except of course, how old was the client when you came in? Because we got to figure it was probably there from the get-go. But it did answer in exactly the way you would expect a heart to answer. And it was very symbolic and flowery and almost poetic, the language that it used. It was such a beautiful, beautiful session. And it told us exactly like this whole list of things for my client to do, which is not uncommon, by the way. Anybody who's had a quantum journeys hypnosis session is aware that like the higher self will say, do this thing or try that thing. So in her case, it included a list of words to meditate on, words and phrases at certain times of the day in a specific place in her home. It also gave her suggestions on what foods to eat and what foods to avoid to better help support her health. And keep in mind, this is coming from her own mouth, okay? This is not me saying it. I am not prescribing anything. I am not advising in these ways. So there's no issue of this being out of my scope of practice. This is information coming from her own mouth, okay? It also gave her some other words of wisdom that I didn't really understand, some encouragement that made sense only to her because of stuff that, you know, is interesting to her in her life, like some tennis metaphors and things that it threw up. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but she did, and it doesn't matter if I do. And so this brings us to one of the reasons why I love ego states transformation so much. It posits that the client's consciousness already knows what it needs in order to come into a state of health and balance. We just got to keep asking the right questions to get it there. So that's our job. Our job is just to facilitate the conversation and get out of the way. It's not about us. So just ask the questions that will get us to the most helpful answers. And lucky for us, Mike Mandel already gave us a fantastic blueprint for these questions in his ego states transformation module. But not to put too fine a line on it, I found that if I approach all of my sessions, whether I'm using quantum journeys hypnosis or ego states or, you know, other things, regression to cause, whatever it is, I treat the session as if my client already has the answers within them somewhere. It's some part of their consciousness already has that. And my job is just to tease that out, not provide them. And this is a really effective way of getting rid of imposter syndrome, guys. Just saying, if you don't make yourself the main character, you don't put the pressure on you to come up with everything as if you are the one who has to know everything. You just have great tools and the skills to use them. Then go into each session with curiosity. The confidence part is really just the confidence that you have the tools and that you know how to use them. But beyond that, it's not up to you to fix the client. That's a two-way thing. It's up to you to facilitate the conversation, to ask the questions. This is how I see it anyway. Some people might disagree, you know, whatever. That's, I find that if I go into the session sort of arrogantly assuming that I know it all, I end up robbing the client of being the main character. And I don't want to do that to them. Because they deserve to be the main character and they're paying me. So let's let them have that spotlight, okay? So anyway, since that session, I've communicated with cancerous tumors, stomach ulcers, aspects of what seem to be like a collective consciousness situation. I've had clients that have met ancestors. I had one that started chanting in Blackfeet, the language, except that he's like a Jewish guy from New York and doesn't speak Blackfeet language. So where did that come from? I don't know. I've had people bring forth wisdom and skills from what seemed to be other lifetimes that weren't previously accessible to them. Now, again, all a model. Maybe this is just their own unconscious mind's way of giving them permission slips to heal. There's no way to quantify that any of these things really exist. But if this is how their mind comes up with ways to give them permission to heal, and they do in fact heal or resolve the issue or whatever it is, then who am I to say that it does or it does not exist? And this is why I don't consider myself a spiritual hypnotist, because it's not up to me. I am just, whatever happens with their session, it's their experience, and I'm just there to support it. And if they get what they need out of it, it doesn't matter whether I believe or disbelieve. And I'm actually pretty skeptical, believe it or not, but naturally skeptical, which means that I don't just blindly believe or blindly disbelieve. I don't just throw things out because they don't fit within my framework, but nor do I just, you know, automatically assume that, yes, that's how things work. Anyway, I find that our highest self, you know, it's that part that unconditionally loves us. Mike calls it the highest wisdom state. I see those as kind of interchangeable. but it's the part that loves you unconditionally forever and is always supportive and always wants the best at all times, kind of like a doting grandparent. It doesn't swoop in and rescue you all the time because it understands how important it is to learn and to grow and how to gain confidence by handling our experiences. But it is available to us. At least it seems to be in my sessions. And I'm sure that some of you have run into this as well. And it just can give us this gentle guidance that we may or may not heed. It gives it to us, but we might say, no, I'm going to go do the destructive thing anyway. And that's our choice. We have that willpower. But it is there. If we ask it, it will remind us of how very worthy and loved we are. And it can fill us with that sense. Like we can just ask and it just fills us as if suddenly, the love cup within us is overflowing. And that's just one of the things that I love about working with the multidimensional aspects of this. That we have access to this higher self or this highest wisdom state. And there are some people that are like, what if I don't have one? I'm like, we all have one. I mean, is there such a thing as like a 6-week-old baby that hates on themselves for having chubby thighs? No, there's not. They're just happy to have a body and be here and be alive and experience love, right? And so that would be because it's coming from a place of its higher self that loves it unconditionally. It hasn't had the other programs come in yet that can kind of like, throw things off kilter a bit. And so I often tell my clients that before we hypnotize them with all of this good stuff, we're going to begin unhypnotizing them first, to pull back the layers of all the crap that they really don't need, that they have just ingested and picked up from wherever. That's just not healthy. Hating on your body being one of those things. So anyway, at this point I could stop, or if you guys want to hear more client session stories, I've got like a couple little ones I can share with you. Show of hands, who wants to stop? Show of hands, who wants more client stories?
I'm gonna suggest, I think if you've got a couple more
I've
client
got like 2 more.
stories, those are a lot of fun. I think people, I'm just mind reading here, but I think people would want those. And then we can jump to a bit of Q&A as well.
Yep. Perfect. Yeah, these will be pretty fast, but they're fun. So this one's kind of intense. I once communicated with a woman's womb, her uterus, which is where she'd been carrying a lot of emotional trauma from a miscarriage that she had had many years prior, like so long ago that she had kind of forgotten about it in her conscious memory. And in the session, her womb started talking, and it said that the reason that she had been unable to shed any weight was because she still had a lot of guilt and shame trapped as trauma in that part of her body. And that she needed to forgive herself and specifically forgive her womb for not being able to carry that baby to full term. And that once she did that, the weight would just fall away. And it took 3 sessions. It wasn't just a one and done because there were some other layers of stuff we had to deal with, but it did. And she did. And over the course of a year, she lost 65 pounds. Another one, this is kind of recent, communication with the urethra of a man who had an overactive bladder. And I was surprised that it wasn't his bladder that came to communicate. It was his urethra. But I was like, okay, well, let's find out. I'm not going in with like assumptions. It's always just like, I wonder what's going to happen. Just going in with curiosity. And it described a situation. It showed a memory to him. And I wasn't intentionally doing regression to cause, but if it happens naturally, it happens naturally. And I just go with it. That means that the client is ready for it if it just comes up naturally, right? Instead of digging around in there trying to find it. And it described a situation from his early childhood where he got in a lot of trouble for wetting his bed. And there was some physical violence involved, unfortunately. And at that moment, his urethra went into hypervigilant mode, and it just kind of got stuck in that pattern ever since. So this resulted in him not wanting to travel or be away from home or, do all the things that he wanted to do in life because he was just always constantly hypervigilant about like how full his bladder is. Is he going to have to go? Is there going to be a bathroom available? Anyway, in both of these cases, hypnosis either completely cleared the issue or lessened it to the degree that it was no longer an active issue. And when I say, like, so for the heart thing, the woman with the heart issue, we turned it all the way down, but it didn't want to just stop having the ability to go into AFib because it said that it was going to be an early warning system for her. so that the only time it ever went into AFib would be when she really needed to pay attention to what was going on with her body. And so I was like, that's great. We don't want to just shut the heart off, right? Like we want it to work as healthily and, in balance as possible. And I wanted to also touch upon communication with cancer. It's surreal. Talking to the cells of cancer, they have a very strong will to survive, but they are fully aware that by doing so, they're destroying their host. It's like a constant cognitive dissonance at a microscopic cellular level. And so at the risk of getting a little too woo here, I have found that coaxing them to leave the body in order to find new life in a different form has been helpful. What I mean by that is energy never really dies, right? It can transmute, it can move into other forms, it can, become sort of disorganized and diffused and then change or evolve. And so basically I say, like, look, if you stay, you're gonna die. You're gonna kill the host and then you die. But if we can find some way to get you to leave and then, through urine or however they want to pass it, or shrink down until it is passable in some fashion, or be removed surgically, but any of these things, then at least it gets the opportunity to exist in some other form rather than just being hit with radiation and chemotherapy until it's just like this shriveled up nothingness. Or that it kills the host entirely. So, and I realize it's not a perfect metaphor because technically, even when the host dies, that's changing into a different form of energy, but cancer cells are not super smart. The heart is, I've noticed, but cancer, not so smart. So you can usually kind of manipulate it a little bit. Just had to say, but it's for a higher purpose, right? Anyway, so with that, I am actually just about done here. I wanted to just leave you with a couple of quotes, though I have them written down. I'm just going to pull them up on my thing here. Okay, so this first one is from astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson. Everybody knows him, right? And he says, not only are we in the universe is in us. And I love that as far as the multidimensional aspects. Professor of cognitive science at University of California in Irvine, Dr. Donald Hoffman, and he studies the science of consciousness, and I'm just a big fan of his. And he says, consciousness is not something that human minds do. Human minds are something that consciousness makes up. And then the last one, Erwin Schrödinger, consciousness cannot be accounted for in physical terms, for consciousness is absolutely fundamental to all of life. And I think he goes on to say that it's a singularity that runs through everything. So that wraps up my ego state stuff. And as promised, I will take Q&A. I also wanted to let you guys know that I do have a special offer just for students of MMHA. It's a very discounted copy of the hypnotic protocol, the money table, which is based on ego states and introjects. So it's a natural progression from what I just went through. But you also get a chance to communicate with the consciousness of money. So yeah, I guess a little bit woo, but just a little bit. And honestly, no two people have the same experience with the money table. It's a hypnotically guided workbook. And has anybody in here actually gotten it? Did I see?
I saw some comments earlier.
Okay.
Somebody had written
Oh,
that
perfect.
they loved
Okay.
it. And by the way, I just dropped the link in the chat, guys.
Thank you. Okay.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, Lena
Chris posted the
said
link
she's done
there.
it, yeah.
Beautiful. And then for those of you that are interested in joining my Quantum Journeys Hypnosis Academy, which is internationally accredited and offers 2 certifications, then I will give you a screaming good deal on it because you're MMHA. It's gonna be a sort of a time sensitive thing, though. I can't have that just be forever. So we'll say till January 1st. And it's only available to MMHA members. So feel free to share it amongst yourselves, but please don't share it with anybody outside of the MMHA verse. And with that, I would love to, and I also, let me just say, not instead of MMHA, but in addition to MMHA, because these guys have a great program that will be the foundation for everything that you ever do. Okay, I'm done. What questions do we have?
Awesome. All right. Well, now, so Timothy and I will we'll pepper you with really hard. No, I'm kidding. We'll just have some fun discussion around
Bring
this.
it.
And yeah, thank you. I 100% want to say, guys, for those of you who have been around a long time, you already know this. For those of you who are a bit newer to the community, welcome, and realize that Mike and I and Timothy and everyone on our team, we are fabulous supporters of what goes on in the hypnosis community. We look at the MMHA as if it's general. If you wanted to become a doctor, you'd go to medical school and become a general you'd become a generalist first. You would understand the basics of all things medicine before you specialized in oncology or skin disorders or whatever you're doing, cardiology, etc. So similarly, you need to learn the foundations of hypnosis in a really practical and fun way so that you can then apply them to whatever field of treatment that you want to apply them to, or if you want to start going off and putting together really interesting ways of dealing with problems like Chris has just described, right? So get the basics down first and then go on and continue and study with other awesome trainers. So that's what we are all about. Lena is just mentioning that the link goes only to the money table, which is correct. That's your link. So maybe if you want to drop in the chat while I'm asking.
I would rather actually talk to the person. So if you're
perfect.
interested in joining QJHA, reach out to me directly.
Even better.
Yeah, I'm just a little bit picky about who gets into the academy because it's a powerful tool and I want to make sure it's in the right hands. And I know that sounds a little bit like, yeah, but
hypnosis, a power so strong it can only be used for good or evil. Remember that, right, guys?
Well, I mean,
right.
There's plenty of it already being used for evil out there in the world. The magazine convincing me that I need to weigh 120 pounds. I think that's pretty evil. So
I mean, if you adopt the view that hypnosis is happening all around us and we are all simply shifting from one trance to another, there are a lot of nefarious people out there who would not call themselves hypnotists, but what they are doing is certainly causing the same result, and it's not useful. So all that to say, let's jump into some questions and some discussion. And I really thought this was a fun presentation. Timothy, go ahead. I can see you chomping at the bit. You got some good stuff here.
Oh my gosh. Kryssa, absolutely fantastic presentation for everybody. Give her a round of applause just because. That was awesome. So for all the
super easy.
Oh gosh. So for all the people who are in my own personal program, Enter the Loop, you totally understood everything she said. She is bang on. I loved what you said, Kryssa, when you said that what the client gives you is just their receipt to cash in. So it gives them the change, whatever that comes up. Perfect. I loved that. That was incredible.
That comes across in Mindscaping, in Enter the Loop, in what you just described, Kryssa. It's such a freaking wonderful concept.
Oh yeah,
permission slips. That's what it is. It's and whatever it is that gives the client the permission to do it. So when I first started running across people having past life regression memories, I just sort of chalked it up to like, well, maybe that's just what they need to experience in order to give themselves the permission to make the change.
Yep.
And it's not up to me whether I believe or disbelieve, because it's not about me. It's about them. Who cares what I believe?
It's about you.
It's about you. Yes. So, I guess really, Kryssa, my first big question, and I'm sure other people have it as well, is when you're asking questions, how do the questions come up? Is it just, do you like model clean language? Do you have your own specific protocol? What is it about the questions?
Well, I tend to start off with the really traditional ones that Mike taught with ego states. So what is your job in the client's life? What is your name? How old was the client when you first began helping them or first came into their life? And then I tell the client, just whatever that first number is that pops into your awareness, that's what we're going with. What do you imagine that this looks like? And if it seems like we're dealing with something, I never intentionally, purposefully go looking for a specific thing. Just like the guy with the bladder issues, I didn't say, let's go talk to the bladder. I was like, let's ask to speak to whatever part of this person needs to, chime in here, right? And we ended up with the urethra, which I was like, interesting, but now I understand why. So I just asked the questions. And then as we're moving through those questions, I'm paying attention to what verbiage comes up for the client. And then that usually just, I'm just a naturally curious person. It drove my mother crazy constantly. Why this? Why that? Why? I'm such a naturally curious person, though, that when they would respond with whatever it is, another question would just be right there. That's just me. If somebody else feels like they need to have more structure, maybe have a list of questions that you can ask, if they do this, then here's an idea of what you can ask, But I think if you go into the session with just pure curiosity and also the intention to help, you kind of can't go wrong.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that as well, just with respect to how you are wording the questions when it comes to almost imagining that a physical part of the body is an ego state. Because I like that metaphor there, where obviously the heart isn't an ego state,
Right.
but you're speaking to it almost as if it is one. And so, how do you word
Part
that?
of that is
Yeah.
referring to the client in the third person.
Mhm.
Because
Bingo.
that sort of takes the critical faculty out of the equation. And so now they're speaking through the voice of whatever that part is.
Mhm.
And not channeling, it's more just giving voice to that state. But when it's an actual body part, I don't know what to call that. But again, this is just a model, but I'm getting information that is specific to that body part. So I'm going to go with it, you know?
Yeah. Do you ever use words like imagine or pretend? Imagine that we're having a conversation with heart.
Um, You know, I do sometimes. If I have somebody who's like just particularly analytical, who really overthinks things, and if I haven't successfully gotten their critical faculty out of the way, I might use words like that. But by the time I'm talking to, like, I'll usually say, "What do you imagine it looks like?" But once they start fleshing it out a little bit, I don't have to keep using that imagine part, you know?
Yeah.
I do use words like see, sense, feel, or know, or how are you experiencing this? Because not everybody sees things. I myself struggle with visual stuff. So I tend to stay away from using words that would hone in on one specific sensory. And I call you guys say VAK, I have VACK only because I'm the C, which is the cognitive part. Sometimes I'll just get a fully formed, it's right there in my head. And I don't hear it, I don't see it, I don't know what it is, but there it is. And so I just call it, so I call it, you know, visual, auditory, cognitive, and kinesthetic. And I'm kinesthetic second, so cognitive, then kinesthetic.
Love it. Love
But
it.
yeah.
Awesome. So I do want to start answering some of these questions in the chat because some people have been chomping at the bit.
Yeah, let's do that, because honestly, we could go on for quite a while asking
Yeah,
questions and fireside chatting this all night long, but let's make sure we get people's questions answered.
Yeah. So Martin asks, well, when you're dealing with a phobia, is the phobia inherited from a parent as an introject, or how would you deal with phobias?
I find that it is often an introject, but not 100% of the time. So I never go in assuming that again. But I will, you know, once again, I just ask to talk to the part of the person that has everything to do with the phobia and see who shows up. And then we keep going. If it turns out that it's an introject, then there's probably something deeper going on behind it. And so we deal with the introject and then we keep going.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, what I found is that, and this is one of those instances, I feel like it's kind of a rare instance, but it's one of those instances where finding out the why sometimes can just totally squash it.
Mhm. Yep. Okay. Awesome. So Tatiana's wondering, when you are first working with somebody, like a new client, do you explain the whole parts and introject stuff, or do you just, what do you do?
Well, I give the sort of the typical preamble so that they don't think like, oh my God, I have multiple personality disorder. No, no, no. And my go-to is this, and anybody who's in my training, I'm so sorry that you have to hear this for the 1000th time, but here we go. I say there's between 50 and 150 different parts to our personalities. These are like sub-personalities. And here's the metaphor that I use. My go-to is that the Kryssa that writes down the grocery store list and goes shopping is usually very healthy. You know, and she's getting all the good, healthy raw vegetables and multigrains. But the Kryssa who gets hungry is very furious with that Kryssa because she just wants Cheetos and chocolate ice cream, damn it. And so those are like two parts of me that don't get along at all. But they're not whole personalities. They're just sub-personalities, right? And so then I'll talk to them about like the part of you that has date night is probably not the same part that sits at the kitchen table and helps your teenager with math homework, right? At least I hope not. The part that whatever. So that's sort of my go-to. And just to make
I
sure
like
that
that,
they know that
Kryssa.
it's
And
not
it's
different.
sort of like the Kryssa that makes the grocery list may not be the Kryssa that goes to the grocery store with that list and may misbehave depending on what's going on, right?
If I forget the list, chances are Hungry Kryssa takes over and I come home with junk food. Yes.
I think that's a
Hungry
great
Kryssa
explanation.
takes over.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think put your hand up, guys. If
She's
you
a
can
beast,
relate
I
with,
tell you.
yeah, if if you can
Yeah.
relate with that way of explaining ego states and subpersonalities, hands up. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good,
Yeah.
good
Yeah. That's a great
explanation.
explanation.
I love it. I really also liked, I just want to say, I liked your metaphor of using an iPhone or a phone of some sort with the apps being the front end interface, because obviously we are not in there able to ask questions of the exact neural structure of the brain that represents the ego state. Because the ego state, we say it's a physical part of the brain, but we're still modeling it to a degree because we can't remove it from the brain and go, oh yeah, this is the ego state in charge of eating healthy
Well,
or
even if we do
whatever.
know, because I did study brain anatomy. So like, let's say we're in Broca's area and we can go, well, this has everything to do with speech, or is that Wernicke's? Anyway, one has to do with speech, one has to do with comprehension. And we can look at it and it's just this blob of gray matter. We can't pinpoint like, oh, there's a word that is comprehensive to the
Bingo.
whatever. Like we just know that it has that ability, but it's like the electricity that's running through the circuits in your home. So
Mhm.
we have to deal with it at the level of a model. We have no other option at this point anyway, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because otherwise it'd be overwhelmingly complicated.
Yeah, or we can just go in there and give everybody lobotomies and see what happens. Or kind of do what
Oh,
they're
that's
already
funny.
doing, which is throw a couple of like psychoactive drugs at them and say, like, does this one help? Oh no, okay, how about this one? Oh, okay, this one. So anyway,
Oh gosh.
What else? Do we
a
have
little
anything else in the
controversial, so
Q&A
I'll
that we
zip it
want to
on
address?
that.
Yeah, yeah. So someone just asking, and I'm assuming it's probably gonna be the same thing, right? How would you apply it to someone who has depression, for example?
Yeah, so my job isn't to agree or disagree with however they've been treating it. And with some people, medication absolutely helps, whether that's placebo or not, doesn't even factor in. I don't care. It's not up to me, right? If it's working for them,
Mhm.
it's working for them. My job is really just to help them feel even better, consistently in whatever way that is. And often with depression, there's this thing that comes with, if you've been depressed for a long time, you have a lot of negative self-talk and a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. So I might not be able to do anything about the depression, but I can help with that negative self-talk, that shame and that guilt. And I can help that person feel loved and lovable. And it's not even me, it's me asking their highest self to give them back those things and to peel
Mhm.
away all the stuff that is causing the negative self-talk and, to unhypnotize them. So that's how I
Yeah.
typically deal with depression and also anxiety. With anxiety, I do a little bit more with like some pattern interrupters and specific tools that can help that I picked up through MMHA, I might add.
Yeah, you
Wonderful.
can, I think for anyone asking those questions as well, just make sure you do go through the new MMHA. Lesson 15 is the one on ego states. And you can look at things like ego state integration to form healing committees of
Yes.
various subpersonalities and support and heal the evaded state and build up positive resources, et cetera, et cetera.
One of my favorite things to do, and this is actually in the session that Mike did with me that's in your new MMHA program right now. But and I love this, is like once we get that ego state into a place of healing, asking it to go spend time with the highest wisdom state. So it can continue to receive therapy essentially behind the scenes so that the next time we come back and talk to that ego state, it's even better.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's really cool. Yeah.
And I love the committee idea. Yeah. I haven't done that as much, but now that you've reminded me, I think I will
I
start
think
incorporating more of that.
it's a young, it feels like ego state therapy, ego state work, parts work, resource state work, whatever you want to call it. It still feels to me like it's probably quite a young field and there's
Hmm.
tons of room for innovation and clever ideas because these are all just models. So we just haven't seen that much yet with respect to what's going to come over the next 2, 3, 4 decades of clever
And
people
I've like
getting thinking.
incorporated a little bit of like, core transformation and internal
Yeah.
family systems and even some RFPI from RTT. Anybody who's got that background will know what that is. Like I incorporate like different concepts, but the foundation of what I use is what I got from Mike Mandel, just because it's so elegant and simple.
Hmm.
Um, and it is, it's just so simple and so elegant. That's why I use it. It's
Yeah.
not complicated.
Yeah.
I want to commend your comment here. I really like that you brought up how interjects, they don't necessarily have to be individual introjects like the mother or the father or the school teacher. They can be society and kind of cultural, almost like an amassed group of people that now you don't even identify it as a single individual, but why wouldn't that be kind of like a mega introject or maybe a meta introject, like
I had
very
one just yesterday that was a bunch of nuns from Catholic school. And that was the introject, was like all of the nuns from all
Yeah.
of the years of Catholic school. Yeah.
wild. Yeah. And just giving somebody the awareness, well, by asking the questions, bringing their conscious awareness to the fact that it isn't actually a part of them, it's an introject. And then by
Oh, and that right there is so
Yeah.
incredibly cathartic for most
Yeah.
people.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the ability to say, hey, what do you want to do with it? Right? It's up to you. You don't have to hold on to this. This is a passenger. Your metaphor about you picked them up, you were not carjacked. I love that as well. You had so many great metaphors in here.
Mhm.
Thank you. I don't know if you guys remember when you did that metaphor challenge years ago and like the t-shirt was like the prize or something. It was like
Yeah.
2020, 2021, something like that. Anyway, that got me started on the track of metaphors, and now they just flow out of me like it just happens. Like I don't even look for them anymore. They just are right there.
Nice.
So thank you. That was
Like
one of those
water
things
out of a
that you
fire
guys were the
hose.
launch pad.
Yeah, that's incredible.
All right. Well, okay. So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes here, but just to recap that Chris has got the link. We'll make sure that the link is posted. Oh, I'm not actually going to post it in the archive because it's a short term. It's not an ongoing discount link.
The money table one is forever and all time.
Oh,
but
perfect. Okay. So in that case, I
Quantum
will
Journeys
leave that.
Hypnosis massive discount deal. I have to stop that at January 1st because I've also brought on somebody else to help me with marketing. And so we're restructuring all of my rates and stuff. So, but between now and January 1st,
I
if you're
like
in
it.
MMHA and you want to get into QJHA, I will give you a screaming good deal. But I do want to at least hear from you directly. So just DM me, or I put my website in there, and I'll also put it in the group feed in Facebook.
Perfect. So they're totally separate things. The money table is one thing, and the academy, totally separate thing. You've got to
Right.
contact Kryssa directly for that.
The money
Yeah.
table is for anybody. You don't have to be a hypnotist. It's for
Yeah.
anybody. You can
Yeah.
also use it with your clients though. So like, feel free to take this. I'm going to do it just for $7. So like super affordable money table workshop and use it with your clients.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome.
I love that idea.
And I've
Use it
improved
yourself
it
and
since
teach
its
your
first
clients.
incarnation, Charity. You were there when I first did it. It's actually better now. There's a whole section on talking with the consciousness of money. So
Nice.
yeah, I don't think you've seen that part yet. Anyway.
And if you have any questions that didn't get answered that you're just dying to have an answer to, make sure that you reach out to either Kryssa. You can also just put a post up, and we'd love that kind of discussion and engagement in MMHA Engage. So make sure that you do that.
Yeah, Chris is has been in the academy for a long, long time. So she's in the group. A lot of our other
And
guests.
I also have no social life. So seriously, tag me all you want. I will be there.
Oh, yeah.
And that's by choice. Sounds a little sad, but actually no, it's totally by choice. But no, really, like if you put something in the group, I'll totally find it and I'll interact with you. At least at this point in my life, I'm still, pretty hands-on and pretty personable.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
All right. Well, then that is probably a good place to wrap it up. I want to say thank you again. Kryssa has been fabulous. Thank you, Timothy, for helping.
Give her
me
another
out
round of
with
applause,
awesome
everybody.
questions.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you to
You
you all.
like
You
to watch me
Stormriders.
blush. That's all that is. Thank you.
All right. So we will be, I guess we'll be back first Tuesday of January in theory, although I have a feeling I'll be in Mexico. So I'm going to offload it to Mike and Timothy to do a Q&A session if they're around. We might postpone the Q&A. I'm not sure. But with that said, we'll just wrap it up so everyone can unmute themselves so we can, in our own Storm Rider unique way, end the meeting by saying,
Thanks again.
Thanks again. And
And
good night.
night.
Good night.